I'm Paul Brown, and I'm with the National Center for Health Research. And how many of you have heard of 21st century cures? Excellent, excellent. So you all have a pretty good idea of it. How many of you love it? My work is done here. I am also with the Patient, Consumer, and Public Health Coalition, in addition to being on the steering committee of Q. So I'm staying pretty busy, and I'm going to try to give you an overview of 21st century cures and what it's about and some of the issues that we have with it. 21st Century Cures Act, what's in the bill? It's 350 plus pages, and the bill promises to expedite access to drugs and devices. It increases the funding to the National Institute of Health by $8.75 billion over 5 years. It increases FDA's funding by $550 million. The goal is to stimulate the development of new cures for a wide range of diseases. Nothing wrong with that goal. The devil, though, of course, is hidden in the details. Many patient groups and other groups support the bill, and that's because drug companies, lobbyists, have promised that it would be the answer to their prayers, that will lead to new cures. Pharma, that's the pharmaceutical lobbyist group, and AdvaMed, medical device group, are huge supporters of this legislation. And of course, as I just mentioned, the bill will provide billions of dollars to the National Institute for Health, but it also lowers standards for FDA approvals, and that's a big problem. So this bill is actually quite complex and potentially dangerous. Lowering standards to achieve the bill's goal is not the answer. Our organization, our coalitions, National Consumers League, Public Citizen, many other groups think that lowering the standards for drugs and devices will not result in cures, but rather expensive, ineffective treatments. The bill's premise, in our opinion, is false. The premise is that the regulatory bottlenecks are the reasons we haven't cured cancer, Alzheimer's, and rare diseases. But the FDA's drug approval process is already the fastest in the world, and last year they approved 51 products, including more orphan drugs and for rare diseases than any other year. So the bill has been sold to lawmakers by offering the increase in money for National Institute of Health, and that's a very important part of this bill. It wasn't in the original bill. Several universities get this money, and I heard lawmakers that normally would be very questioning on this bill say, this is great, my university is going to get research money. So they got a lot of people on board with that piece right there. It also got through with the help of special interest money. According to the New York Times, many of the top supporters of the legislation received hundreds of thousands of dollars in contributions from the pharmaceutical industry and the medical device industry last year. The other thing that they did with this legislation is they really tugged at lawmakers' hearts, their heartstrings. And the bill is heavy on emotional appeals and light on evidence for safety and effectiveness of medical products. Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the committee that this went through, this is from their website, features stories about how the bill may save the lives of children with severe and terminal illnesses. You gotta love that child. I mean, you know, it really does pull at your heartstrings. And then the people pictured there, that's chairman of the committee, Mr. Upton, and also Representative Congresswoman DeGette from Colorado. Those are the two big forces behind this legislation. What the bill's backers don't mention, though, is that the bill lowers the FDA standards of evidence for all treatments, whether urgently needed or not. The bill's backers boast of overwhelming support, but op-eds and articles tell a little bit different story. Respected scientists, doctors, and others oppose the 21st century cure. They have a dire warning that the bill endangers patients' health. Nationally respected cardiologists, such as Dr. Rita Redberg, note the bill would subject millions of Americans to unsafe and untested medical devices. Former FDA Commissioner David Kessler, HIV/AIDS activists, and others agreed. Yale HIV/AIDS activist, I think Barbara, you know Greg quite well. He has stated that the bill would radically alter the nature of drug and device approvals. Of course, Harvard, medical doctors at Harvard, Dr. Jerry Avorn and Aaron Kessler said that the bill alters requirements for approving medical devices, which already lack rigor compared with drug evaluations. I don't know, I know that Terry is very much aware of this, but I don't know if most of you know that most drugs, most devices are not actually approved by the FDA. They're cleared by a process called the 510K process, which means they're substantially equivalent to something that's already on the market. Critical headlines. Faster drug approvals are not always better and can be worse. JAMA Internal Medicine. FDA's Hamburg, on their way out, blasts the bill aimed at speeding innovation, modern healthcare, speeding new antibiotics to market, a fake fix, the BMJ. Don't weaken the FDA's drug approval process, the New York Times. The bill promises to speed up drug approvals so much that it's making people uncomfortable, Washington Post. How not to fix the FDA, the New York Times. And just today, in the BMJ, Peter Doshi, who spoke earlier, has a pretty good overview of the bill in here. It's nice and concise piece. If you get a chance, look it up online. It'll take you all about 7 minutes to read it, if that. The problems with the bill. The bill creates new requirements for the FDA, including replacing FDA reviews with third-party review of devices. And these aren't the lower-risk devices or moderate-risk devices. They're talking about Class 3, which are the high-risk devices. So this is very disturbing. The FDA actually came out with some guidance, or I believe earlier this year, on third-party reviews, and they explicitly excluded the high-risk devices. The White House says the FDA will be unable to implement the programs in the bill due to underfunding, and that's another big issue right there. The bill urges the FDA to use animal studies and test tube studies as the basis for approval rather than randomized clinical trials. The bill urges the FDA to base approval on surrogate endpoints instead of patients' health or survival, basically how the patient's outcome came about. The bill could be hugely expensive if FDA approves expensive new drugs that don't work. And in yesterday's Washington Post, there was a couple articles on that. One was on an Alzheimer's drug, another one was on a cancer drug. And one of the physicians quoted in the article about the cancer drugs, the new cancer drugs, says there are so many drugs whose actual value is debatable, and despite that, their price is astronomical. So if we're lowering the standards and they're increasing prices at the same time, that could be a big hit to some of our federal government programs, such as Medicare and Medicaid. The bill actually reverses what Congress approved in 2012. They approved in the legislation from 2012 that there should be more diverse populations in clinical trials, especially for FDA. This bill actually says you can use smaller clinical trials. If you're using smaller clinical trials, absolutely, it will probably go through faster, but you're not going to be able to have analyzed by subpopulations such as women, minorities, people over 65. And of course, women and older people metabolize drugs differently. I think we're all aware of the Ambien study a while back where women were still drowsy after taking the sleeping aid hours and hours after they were supposed to be wide awake. The bill allows clinical trials that are too small to analyze in different subpopulations, as I just mentioned. The bill allows the FDA to determine a drug or the device's effectiveness based on anecdotes rather than on scientific evidence. I think that's probably the biggest thing for this group. Drugs could be approved on clinical experience. What does that mean? That means the experience of only one or more physicians or patients. Again, too little. The bill allows drugs studied on small groups of specific types of patients to be marketed and prescribed to everyone. That goes against FDA policy for years, decades actually. Life-saving medical devices such as heart valves, I mentioned this earlier, these are the class 3 devices, the highest risk devices, could be approved. They're lowering the standards using case histories. The bill urges FDA to approve drugs for serious diseases, not on direct evidence, but on studies on rats rather than humans, which is very preliminary findings. So action, what can we do? Well, the bill has passed the House, passed by overwhelming number, big support on that. What we can do, though, right now, as we're in here right now talking, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, the HELP Committee, their staffers are working on the Senate version of this bill right now. So what we need to do is you need to take out your cell phones, get my email there, send me an email. I will add you to my action alert list. We can change the Senate bill for the better. I truly believe that. Right now, it's important to get messages to the senators who are on the HELP Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. A little bit later, it's going to be important to get messages to the entire Senate. The key members on the HELP Committee are the chairman, Alexander from Tennessee, and the ranking member, Murray from Washington State. So if you're from those states, you could be my new best friend. And we will be putting together letters or talking points that you, and if you contact me and you tell me your name and your state, I will tell you which staff person to contact, because each senator has a specific staff person that works on these issues, and I have that information. The New York Times said the bill should be either rewritten or eliminated. Actions, just tell senators not to lower FDA standards for safety and efficacy, and tell them increasing NIH funding is extremely important and deserves a standalone bill. Concluding thoughts, we understand that patients with terminal and curable illnesses are willing to take unproven drugs with higher risk, but that shouldn't be for the whole population. And also the roadblocks to these drugs are not caused by the FDA. The compassionate use program the FDA has, they streamline that. Almost always when there's a problem, the company doesn't want to have the experimental drug out there in the market. We are sympathetic to children. You got to love that child earlier in the slide, and others with incurable diseases. However, in our rush to find new treatments, we should not harm patients with ineffective devices or toxic drugs. And finally, you won't see this boy on the 21st Century website. And thanks.